We want the suspect to know that the no snitch policy will never protect you in our community, that we are coming for you, we're looking for you, and we'll leave no stone unturned in trying to find out your whereabouts. But at the end of the day, we want this brother to know we will not rest until you're held accountable for this crime. And this was a wicked crime, and a crime against women, and a crime against...
A young woman boards a flight with hope in her heart. She's only 24 years old. She has plans, dreams, a birthday to celebrate, a fresh start waiting hundreds of miles away. She leaves California and travels to Houston, Texas, believing opportunity is finally within reach. Within days, she will disappear. No goodbye, no final phone call, no warning, just silence. Then investigators discover something chilling, a cell phone abandoned in a park, covered in blood. Months later, human remains are found deep inside a Texas forest. And at the center of the investigation stands a man police say murdered her, dismembered her body, and escaped before they could place him in handcuffs. Years later, he is still missing, still wanted, still one of America's most elusive fugitives. This is the story of Felicia Johnson, a case that began with a birthday trip and ended with one of the most haunting homicide investigations in recent Texas history. Before we begin, if you're new to the channel, subscribe and turn on notifications. We cover true crime cases through forensic evidence, investigative analysis, and documented facts. And after hearing this case, tell us in the comments, do you believe the suspect is still hiding somewhere in the United States, or has he already escaped the country? Now let's begin. Felicia Marie Johnson was 24 years old. Friends and family described her as ambitious, independent, and determined to build a better future. Like many young adults trying to find their place in the world, she was searching for opportunities that could help her move forward financially. In April 2022, she traveled from San Diego, California, to Houston, Texas. The trip was supposed to be exciting. It was around her birthday, a chance to explore new possibilities, a chance to make connections, a chance to earn money and start building the future she envisioned for herself. But Houston would become the last place she was ever seen alive. As investigators later reconstructed her final days, they discovered that Felicia had been pursuing employment opportunities connected to Houston's nightlife industry. According to reports, she visited CoverGirl's nightclub, a well-known establishment in northwest Houston. At first, nothing seemed unusual. She was a young woman exploring work opportunities in a new city. People do that every day. But somewhere during those final hours, Felicia became connected to a man investigators would later accuse of murder. A man whose name would soon appear in headlines across the nation. A man who would disappear before police could arrest him. Investigators would later identify him as Chukwuebuka Nwobodo. At the time, neither Felicia's family nor law enforcement had any reason to believe that this encounter would become the final chapter of her life. The timeline investigators eventually assembled paints a disturbing picture. During the early morning hours of April 16, 2022, Felicia accepted a meeting reportedly arranged online. According to investigators, the meeting involved an offer worth approximately $500. To many people, it may have seemed like a routine arrangement, a business transaction, a meeting expected to last only a short time. Instead, investigators believe it became a death sentence. At some point that morning, Felicia entered a vehicle. The driver was allegedly Chukwuebuka Nwobodo. Digital evidence would later place her with him. Surveillance records, electronic data, phone information. Piece by piece, investigators began following the trail. The evidence suggested Felicia traveled to Nwobodo's apartment on South Richmond Avenue. What happened after she entered that apartment remains known only to one person. And according to investigators, that person vanished before he could ever answer questions in court. As the hours passed, concern began growing. Family members attempted to contact Felicia. Calls went unanswered. Messages received no response. At first, there was hope. Maybe her phone battery died. Maybe she was busy. Maybe she simply needed time. But as the silence stretched longer and longer, fear began replacing optimism. Every missing person's case reaches a point where loved ones realize something is terribly wrong. For Felicia's family, that realization arrived quickly. This wasn't normal behavior. This wasn't someone taking a break from social media. This wasn't someone who simply forgot to check in. Something had happened, and investigators would soon find evidence suggesting the worst. One of the first major breakthroughs came when authorities recovered Felicia's cell phone. But it wasn't found in a hotel room. It wasn't found inside a vehicle. It wasn't found with her belongings. Instead, investigators discovered it abandoned near Bear Creek Pioneers Park. And what they saw immediately raised alarms. The phone was covered in blood. That single discovery changed everything. Missing person investigations often begin with uncertainty. People disappear for many reasons. But a blood-covered cell phone tells a different story. It suggests violence. It suggests injury. It suggests someone may have gone to great lengths to separate a victim from the one item most likely to reveal the truth. For investigators, the phone became more than evidence. It became a warning that they might not be searching for a missing woman anymore. They might be searching for a homicide victim. As forensic teams examined the evidence, detectives began following every digital breadcrumb they could find. Cell phone records, location data, communication history, electronic transactions, surveillance footage. Each piece added another layer to the growing picture, and the picture wasn't looking good. The trail repeatedly led back to one location, one apartment, one suspect, one final known destination. Nwobodo's apartment. Investigators obtained search warrants. They entered the residence. What they allegedly found inside would become central to the murder case. Authorities later stated evidence suggested Felicia had been killed inside that apartment. Forensic investigators documented the scene, collected samples, preserved evidence, analyzed traces that most people would never notice. Tiny fragments, microscopic stains, invisible clues, the kind of evidence that often speaks louder than eyewitness testimony. Because unlike people, forensic evidence doesn't forget, it doesn't change its story, and it doesn't lie. The deeper investigators dug, the more troubling the evidence became. What initially appeared to be a missing person investigation was rapidly evolving into something far darker. A homicide investigation. And according to detectives, the evidence was pointing toward premeditated efforts to conceal what had happened. But the most disturbing discoveries were still ahead. Because investigators soon uncovered activity that allegedly occurred after Felicia vanished. Activity that would leave seasoned detectives asking a chilling question. Had someone been planning how to make a body disappear? And if so, how far had they gone to cover their tracks? By this point in the investigation, detectives were no longer asking whether Felicia Johnson had disappeared voluntarily. The evidence was leading them somewhere else, somewhere darker. Every new discovery seemed to strengthen the belief that she had never left that apartment alive. Investigators began reconstructing the hours following her disappearance. When detectives examine a homicide investigation, they often focus on a simple question. What did the suspect do after the victim was last seen? People can lie. Stories can change. Memories can fade. But behavior leaves a trail. And according to investigators, the behavior they uncovered was deeply troubling. As detectives reviewed surveillance footage and transaction records, they allegedly discovered purchases made shortly after Felicia vanished. The items themselves might not seem unusual at first glance. A flashlight, towels, trash bags, a mechanical saw. Individually, none of these items proves a crime occurred. Millions of people purchase similar items every day. But investigators don't examine evidence in isolation. They examine context, timing, patterns, and according to authorities, the timing of these purchases raised serious concerns. Why would someone buy those specific items shortly after a woman was allegedly last seen entering his apartment? That question would become a major focus of the investigation. Detectives weren't interested in coincidence. They were interested in what those purchases might reveal about what happened behind closed doors. As forensic analysts continued examining evidence, investigators developed a theory that would shock the public. They believed Felicia had been murdered, but they also believed the crime didn't end there. According to investigative findings, authorities suspected that efforts were made to conceal and dispose of her body. The theory was horrifying, and if true, it would explain why no trace of Felicia could initially be found despite extensive searches. Cases involving body disposal present unique challenges for investigators. Without a victim's remains, proving exactly what happened becomes more difficult. Every missing piece creates another obstacle. Every day that passes allows evidence to degrade. Every delay benefits the person trying to hide the truth. Yet detectives continued pressing forward. Then another disturbing piece of evidence reportedly emerged: the suspect's internet activity. In the digital age, search histories can become windows into a person's thoughts. Investigators routinely examine internet records because people often reveal things online they would never say aloud. And according to reports connected to the investigation, authorities uncovered searches that immediately drew attention. Among them were phrases reportedly involving questions about becoming a serial killer, questions about getting away with murder, questions that prosecutors would later view through a very different lens once Felicia disappeared. Of course, internet searches alone do not prove guilt. People search strange topics for countless reasons: curiosity, entertainment, research. But when those searches appear alongside forensic evidence, suspicious purchases, and a missing woman who was last seen with the person conducting them, investigators begin asking difficult questions. Questions that demand answers. Questions that often become central inside a courtroom. As detectives continued piecing together the timeline, they noticed something else. According to investigators, there appeared to be a deliberate effort to separate Felicia from her belongings. Her phone had already been discovered discarded and covered in blood. Other personal items were reportedly missing. To detectives, it looked less like someone trying to help a missing woman return home, and more like someone trying to erase evidence, trying to erase a trail, trying to erase a person. But despite the growing evidence, investigators faced a problem, a major problem. The most important person in the case was no longer where they expected him to be. The suspect was disappearing, and he was disappearing fast. By the time authorities believed they had assembled enough evidence to pursue criminal charges, precious time had already passed. Time that could never be recovered. Time that may have made all the difference. Investigators continued building their case. Witness interviews, forensic examinations, digital records, search warrants. Each new piece reinforced the theory prosecutors were developing. Eventually, authorities believed they had enough evidence to move forward. Murder charges were prepared. Tampering with evidence charges followed. The case appeared ready to enter its next phase. An arrest, an interrogation, a prosecution, a trial. The moment when evidence would finally be presented before a jury. But that moment never came. Because when law enforcement attempted to locate the accused killer, he was gone, vanished. The man investigators believed was responsible for Felicia's death had disappeared before they could place him in handcuffs. Just like that, the case changed again. It was no longer just a homicide investigation. It had become a fugitive hunt. The accused killer had seemingly slipped through the cracks, and that reality generated criticism and frustration. Many observers wondered whether authorities had waited too long. Could the suspect have been arrested earlier? Could additional surveillance have prevented his escape? Could investigators have moved faster? Those questions remain the subject of debate. What isn't debated is the outcome. The suspect was gone, and years later, he still has not been captured. For Felicia's family, the situation was devastating. They weren't only grieving a missing loved one, they were watching the person accused of taking her life remain beyond the reach of justice. Every day without an arrest felt like another wound, another reminder that answers remained out of reach. But perhaps the most painful chapter was still ahead. Because despite investigators' growing certainty that Felicia had been murdered, her family still lacked one thing: her remains. Without them, there was always a lingering uncertainty, a tiny fragment of hope, a possibility, however remote, that she might somehow still be alive. Families of missing persons often live between hope and heartbreak. They desperately want answers, yet they fear what those answers might be. For months, Felicia's loved ones waited. They searched. They prayed. They hoped. Meanwhile, investigators continued combing through evidence and following leads. The search extended beyond Houston, into rural areas, wooded areas, remote locations where evidence could remain hidden for months, perhaps years. Then, nearly 10 months after Felicia disappeared, a discovery would transform the case forever. A worker in a remote Texas forest noticed something unusual. Human remains, scattered among the wilderness, far from the city, far from the apartment where investigators believed the crime occurred, far from the life Felicia had hoped to build when she arrived in Houston. Authorities quickly responded. The area was secured. Forensic teams arrived. Evidence technicians began documenting every inch of the scene. Because once a body recovery site is disturbed, information can be lost forever. Every footprint matters. Every fragment matters. Every detail matters. Investigators knew this discovery could finally provide the answers they had been seeking for nearly a year. But as they began examining the remains, another grim reality emerged. The remains were incomplete, and that finding appeared consistent with the theory detectives had been developing since the earliest stages of the investigation. A theory involving dismemberment, a theory involving concealment, a theory involving an extraordinary effort to make a victim disappear. The next step would be confirmation. Investigators needed science to speak: DNA analysis, dental comparisons, forensic identification. The process would take time, but eventually the results arrived, and they would bring both closure and heartbreak. The remains belonged to Felicia Johnson, the young woman who had traveled to Houston seeking opportunity, the young woman whose birthday trip became a nightmare, the young woman whose family had spent months hoping for a different ending. Now there was no uncertainty, no possibility she would walk through the door again, no chance of receiving one final phone call, only grief, only loss, and a growing determination to bring the accused killer to justice. But one major obstacle remained. The man investigators wanted to arrest was still missing, and somewhere out there, beyond the reach of law enforcement, he remained free. For investigators, the identification of the remains answered one question, but it raised another, a far more frustrating question. Where was the man accused of killing Felicia Johnson? The DNA results confirmed what her family had feared for months. The young woman who had traveled to Houston searching for opportunity was gone. The search for a missing person was over. The search for a fugitive had only just begun. Across the country, law enforcement agencies circulated the suspect's information: photographs, physical descriptions, wanted notices. Tips were requested from the public. Investigators hoped someone somewhere had seen him, perhaps a friend, a relative, a former co-worker, a neighbor. Anyone who might unknowingly hold the key to finding one of Houston's most wanted murder suspects. But as weeks turned into months, and months turned into years, the fugitive remained out of reach. No arrest, no courtroom, no trial, no verdict. The silence that had once surrounded Felicia's disappearance now surrounded the man accused of causing it. And that silence became one of the most haunting aspects of the entire case. Because unlike many homicide investigations, this one never reached its final chapter. Most true crime stories eventually arrive at a courtroom. Evidence is presented. Witnesses testify. Jurors deliberate. A verdict is delivered. But the Felicia Johnson case remains frozen in a different place, a place between accusation and justice, a place where investigators believe they know what happened. But the legal process cannot move forward because the accused remains missing. For Felicia's family, that reality has been especially painful. Grief is difficult enough, but grieving without accountability creates a different kind of suffering. Every birthday becomes a reminder. Every holiday becomes a reminder. Every year that passes becomes another reminder that the person accused of taking Felicia's life has never stood before a judge, never answered questions under oath, never faced a jury, never heard a verdict. Instead, her loved ones have spent years watching a fugitive investigation continue without resolution. As the case gained national attention, many people began asking the same question. How does someone simply disappear in the modern world? After all, today's society is built around technology. Cell phones track movement, security cameras monitor streets, financial transactions create records, social media leaves footprints. Escaping entirely seems almost impossible, yet history shows that fugitives can remain hidden for years, sometimes decades. Some rely on relatives willing to help. Some use false identities. Some move frequently to avoid detection. Others leave the country entirely. Investigators have never publicly revealed exactly where they believe the suspect may be hiding, and that uncertainty has fueled endless speculation. Did he flee Texas immediately after realizing investigators were closing in? Did he receive help from someone close to him? Did he leave the United States? Or is he still living quietly somewhere, hoping the attention surrounding the case eventually fades? Those questions remain unanswered. What investigators have consistently maintained is that the case remains active. The warrant remains active, and authorities continue seeking information regarding his whereabouts. Forensic evidence often speaks loudly, but in this case, it is the combination of evidence that has drawn so much attention. The digital trail, the apartment investigation, the blood-covered cell phone, the suspicious purchases, the reported internet searches, the discovery of human remains. Taken individually, each piece tells part of the story. Together, they create the framework of the prosecution's theory, a theory investigators believed was strong enough to support murder charges. But despite the evidence, one fundamental principle remains important. In the American justice system, criminal charges are accusations, not convictions. A defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty in court. And because the suspect has never been apprehended, the evidence has never been tested through a full criminal trial. That reality leaves many legal questions unanswered, questions only a courtroom can resolve. Yet regardless of legal outcomes, one fact cannot be disputed. A 24-year-old woman lost her life. A family lost a daughter. Friends lost someone they cared about. And a future was taken away forever. When people first hear this case, they often focus on the shocking details. The alleged dismemberment, the bloody phone, the fugitive suspect, the forest where remains were discovered. But beneath those headlines is something much simpler. A young woman trusted the wrong person, and that decision changed countless lives forever. Cases like this also reveal the extraordinary role forensic science plays in modern investigations. Without digital evidence, detectives may never have reconstructed Felicia's final movements. Without forensic analysis, investigators may never have connected critical pieces of evidence. Without DNA testing, her remains might never have been identified. Forensics cannot speak, but it leaves a voice behind. A voice investigators learn to hear. A voice that often becomes the most reliable witness in a homicide investigation. And in this case, that voice helped transform a missing person report into a murder investigation. Yet even the strongest forensic evidence has limitations. Science can identify a victim. Science can reconstruct timelines. Science can uncover hidden connections. But science cannot place handcuffs on a fugitive. That responsibility belongs to law enforcement. And until the accused killer is found, the story remains unfinished. Perhaps that is why the Felicia Johnson case continues to resonate with so many people. It contains all the elements of a true crime mystery. A sudden disappearance, a disturbing trail of evidence, a shocking forensic investigation. Human remains hidden in a remote forest. A suspect who vanished before arrest. But unlike a movie, there is no ending yet. No final courtroom scene. No closing argument. No jury foreperson standing to read a verdict. Just an open case waiting for its final chapter. Somewhere tonight, investigators may still be reviewing tips. Someone may recognize a face on a wanted poster. Someone may know exactly where the fugitive is hiding. And if that day ever comes, the case could move forward in ways it never has before. Witnesses could testify. Evidence could be presented. Questions could finally be answered. and a family that has waited years for justice could finally see the legal process begin. Until then, Felicia Johnson's story remains both a homicide investigation and a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly a promising future can disappear, a reminder that digital interactions with strangers can carry hidden dangers, and a reminder that justice delayed is not always justice denied. Many of the most significant fugitive arrests in American history happened years after the suspects disappeared. Some were captured after routine traffic stops. Some were identified through anonymous tips. Some were located because someone recognized a face they had seen in the news. The passage of time does not erase a warrant, and it does not erase the determination of investigators seeking answers. As we conclude this case, one question remains. Where is the man accused of killing Felicia Johnson? Is he living under a new identity? Has he fled to another country? Or is he hiding in plain sight, counting on the world to forget? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Do you believe this fugitive will eventually be captured, or do you think he has successfully disappeared forever? If you found this documentary informative, subscribe and turn on notifications for more true crime investigations, forensic breakdowns, and unsolved mysteries. Because sometimes the most important cases are not the ones that have been solved. They're the ones still waiting for justice. And for Felicia Johnson's family, that wait continues today.